Perry, a rising star in the world of investigative journalism, had never forgotten the city streets where he'd been raised. A cradle of love and violence, mystery and loss. His old neighborhood held its stories close. One such story had remained unfinished, the tale of a serial killer known as the Midnight Stalker. The monster had never been caught. His identity remained a mystery, haunting Perry's memories and dreams. When Perry returned home, he knew he needed to confront this old specter that had plagued his childhood. On his first night back, he walked the streets, tracing the old paths he'd known. The urban labyrinth seemed untouched by time, unchanged by the world around it. As Perry ventured deeper into the familiar darkness, he noticed a shadow moving quietly between the city's towering brick edifices. A feeling of déjà vu washed over him. Perry decided to follow the figure. His journalistic instincts took over. He recognized the walk, the predatory nature of the shadow. It was the stalker. The figure led him through a winding path, mirroring the ones the infamous killer took years ago. At the end of the route, they reached a crumbling, abandoned house. Perry felt a knot tighten in his stomach. This house was where the stalker had claimed his last victim. Drenched in moonlight, the specter turned, revealing a visage both haunting and familiar. Perry's eyes widened in horror and recognition. The face that stared back at him was a mirror reflection. It was his own face. How could this be? Perry had been barely a teenager when the murders had taken place. But there it was, his own face, grinning wickedly back at him from the shrouded darkness. Suddenly his mind reeled back to his childhood, when he'd often wake up in the middle of the night, disoriented, with no memory of where he'd been. His parents chalked it up to sleepwalking. But the nightmares he had, the details of crime scenes he saw in dreams before they were discovered, it all made a chilling sense now. But there was one mystery that remained. Perry was sure he wasn't killing now. He had clear memories of each night. Why was the specter back? Then it hit him. His reflection was here not to continue its old reign of terror, but to confess. To confess to him, the journalist who had evaded the truth for so long. And Perry knew what he had to do. He spent the rest of the night penning the hardest story he'd ever written. A confession, an expose, a resolution to the horror that had gripped his city all those years ago. He wrote about his childhood sleepwalking, the nightmares, his mirrored specter, and his horrifying realization. As dawn broke, Perry was emotionally drained but filled with a sense of justice. The Midnight Stalker at last was unmasked. He sent his piece to the local paper, and later that day turned himself in to the authorities. Perry's return home had not just unveiled the ghost of his city, but also the ghost within him. And as he sat in the confinement of his cell, waiting for the due process of law, he felt a strange sense of peace. The stalker was no more. The darkness within him had been faced, confronted, and finally had surrendered to the light. Perry's story hit the city like a hurricane. News of the unmasking of the Midnight Stalker spread like wildfire. The neighborhood he grew up in, the city, and the entire country was rocked by the revelation. Perry, the celebrated investigative journalist turned self-confessed serial killer, was now a national headline. And while his confession caused a stir, so did his willingness to face the consequences. His action ignited fierce debates on television, in newspapers, online forums, and everywhere people gathered. The once black and white case of the Midnight Stalker had shades of gray that many struggled to comprehend. Meanwhile, Perry sat in his cell, a peculiar tranquility settling over him. He took out a small notebook and began to write. The story of the stalker was over, but there were still stories within him that needed to be told. Every night as the clock struck midnight, he wrote. He penned down stories of his neighborhood, of the people he knew, their struggles, their hopes, and their dreams. In the solitude of his confinement, Perry found a way to give a voice to his community, a voice that had been muffled for so long. Soon, Perry's writings found their way out of his cell and into the hands of the public. An anonymous benefactor had begun publishing them, and people started to read. They read about the stories from their neighborhood, stories written by a man who was part of them, who had lived among them, who understood them. The city, once haunted by the terror of the Midnight Stalker, began to heal through Perry's stories. The tales wove a tapestry of resilience, showcasing the spirit of a community that refused to be defined by its darkest hour. As for Perry, his life took a turn that he never anticipated. He was tried and sentenced, his freedom taken away as the weight of his past actions finally caught up to him. But within his cell, he found another kind of freedom, a freedom to tell stories that mattered. He was no longer Perry, the investigative journalist, nor was he the dreaded Midnight Stalker. He had transformed into Perry the storyteller, the chronicler of tales that resonated with truth and humanity. And in this new role, he found a sense of purpose, a redemption of sorts. As the moon shone on the city each night, no longer a reminder of a lurking stalker, but a beacon of hope, Perry wrote. And in every word, in every story, he left a part of his soul, a testament to a life lived in shadows, but redeemed in the light of truth. Dominic Dino Corleone was an aging gangster, once a feared figure in his prime, now living in the shadow of his former glory. His neighborhood had seen him rise from a small-time hoodlum to an untouchable godfather. His name commanded respect and fear, but his power came at a heavy price. Now, in the twilight of his life, the past began to haunt him. One quiet night, as he walked down his old familiar streets, he heard something strange. At first, it was a low murmur, like the city whispering secrets in his ear. Then the murmur turned into distinct voices, cries of despair and agony that resonated with a haunting familiarity. They were the echoes of the souls he had wronged. With every step he took, the asphalt beneath his feet pulsed with spectral cries. Ghostly figures rose from the ground, tormenting him with their haunting presence. They were his past victims, the rivals he'd eliminated, innocent bystanders caught in the crossfire, the lives he had ruined with his reckless ambition. Terrified but resolved, Dino knew he had to atone for his sins. But how does one make amends to ghosts? He decided to do the only thing he could, help the living relatives of those he'd wronged. He started by visiting Maria, the widow of a rival gangster he'd ordered killed years ago. She lived a life of hardship, raising her 2 children in a cramped apartment. Dino offered her financial assistance, saying it was a debt he owed her late husband. The suspicious look in her eyes softened, replaced by grateful tears. Next, he tracked down Tommy, a young man hooked on drugs, a fallout of Dino's one-time lucrative narcotics trade. Dino pulled strings, got him into a rehabilitation facility, and vowed to support his recovery. Each act of restitution brought a strange peace, yet the spectral cries continued, growing louder with each passing day. Desperate, Dino decided to confess his sins publicly, exposing his life of crime and his attempts at atonement. His confession sent ripples through the city. The once feared godfather was now an old man burdened with guilt. Some sneered, some sympathized, but most were shocked. His past victims' families reacted differently. Some accepted his attempts at atonement. Others dismissed it as a futile exercise. Dino understood. He knew his efforts could never truly compensate for their loss. One day, as he walked down the same old street, bracing himself for the spectral cries, he noticed an eerie silence. The asphalt was quiet, the air free of the mournful cries. Instead, he saw a figure of a young man standing ahead. As he approached, he recognized the figure. It was him, a younger Dino, in the prime of his ruthless reign. The specter looked at him, a smirk playing on his lips, then slowly faded away. In its place stood a small child, smiling innocently at Dino. A surge of emotions overcame him, and he reached out, but the child too vanished, leaving a trail of laughter echoing in the street. For the first time in years, Dino felt an odd sense of release. The apparitions were gone. The echoes had finally faded. His atonement had not silenced them, but perhaps his acknowledgement of them, his confession, had given the souls some peace. His journey was far from over. He had more debts to pay, more lives to mend. But as he walked the path of reparation, he was no longer a feared gangster, but a penitent man seeking redemption, accompanied by the echoes of the asphalt, once painful reminders of his past, but now silent witnesses of his journey towards redemption. Every day, Dino continued to help the people he had wronged. He helped send children of his past victims to school. He funded addiction recovery programs in the city. He started initiatives to help the community's youth find gainful employment and divert their path from crime. Each step in his journey made headlines, and people started seeing Dino in a different light. The once notorious gangster was now becoming a beacon of change. His story was a reminder that even those who walked the darkest paths could seek and find redemption. One day, as Dino was walking down his old street, he heard the laughter of children playing, the chatter of neighbors, and the bustling life of the city he had once held in the grip of fear. The echoes of the asphalt were now filled with life, hope, and a future. The spectral cries were long gone, replaced by sounds of a community healing and growing. As Dino walked those streets, now an old man in the autumn of his life, he felt a sense of peace. The haunting specters of his past were now just a distant memory. In their place stood the echoes of a new narrative, of change, atonement, and redemption. In his twilight years, Dino had found a purpose that his younger self could never have comprehended. The echoes of the asphalt were his guiding force, a reminder of his past and a beacon for his future. And as he listened to them each day, he found the strength to continue on his journey, a journey towards redemption and reconciliation. And so Dominic Dino Corleone, the once feared gangster, became a symbol of change, his story echoing through the streets he once ruled, a testament to the power of repentance and redemption, and proof that even the darkest souls could find their way back to the light. His life became a tale whispered and echoed in the asphalt of his city, an enduring story of transformation that would inspire generations to come. In the forgotten corners of a bustling city, a neighborhood lived in the iron grip of poverty and crime. Here, amidst the crumbling buildings and graffiti-laden walls, lived Jamal, a quiet teenager with dreams too big for his confined world. Jamal was unlike the other kids his age. While they aspired to escape their circumstances through music or sport, Jamal found solace in books. His mother, a janitor at a local library, fed his passion for knowledge, often bringing home discarded books. One day she brought home a large, dusty old tome. It was unlike any book Jamal had seen before. The text was in a language he could not identify, yet, as he turned the pages, the words started making sense to him. It was a book of alchemy, filled with arcane knowledge and ancient wisdom. Fascinated, Jamal began experimenting. Using the limited resources available, he discovered that he could transmute simple materials into valuable ones. He could turn scraps of metal into silver, broken glass into precious gems. It was a miraculous ability, a secret treasure he could use to better his life and that of his struggling community. He began small. He transmuted enough to cover his family's debts, their rent, his mother's medical bills. But as news of his sudden wealth spread, the ruthless local gang led by a man called Razor grew curious and suspicious. One night the gang cornered Jamal. They threatened him and his mother unless he revealed his secret. Terrified, Jamal demonstrated his alchemical skills, changing a broken beer bottle into a gemstone. Razor, taken aback by what he'd witnessed, saw an opportunity to exploit Jamal's abilities. Days turned into weeks as Jamal was forced to use his alchemical powers for Razor's gain. His neighborhood, once teetering on the brink of desolation, now thrived on the illicit wealth generated by his abilities. But the cost was high. Razor's power increased, the gang's activities grew, and violence escalated. Then one night, an incident shook Jamal. A young boy, merely a bystander, was caught in a gang crossfire and killed. The sight of the lifeless boy reminded Jamal of his younger self. He realized that his powers were not improving his neighborhood, but turning it into a more dangerous place. Fueled by guilt and determination, Jamal decided to use the book's knowledge to end Razor's reign. He found a particular transmutation, a way to change a person's perspective, their understanding. It was risky and had a high cost, a part of the alchemist's own life essence. Without any other option, Jamal decided to sacrifice part of his life to transform Razor. The next day, under the guise of creating more wealth, he performed the risky transmutation. A blinding light enveloped Razor, and Jamal felt his own energy drain. When the light faded, Razor was disoriented, his ruthless demeanor replaced with a look of stark realization. He let Jamal go and disbanded the gang. The neighborhood was stunned by Razor's sudden change. The man who was once a symbol of fear was now advocating for peace and harmony. The neighborhood slowly healed, building itself up from the ashes of its past. Education, once a discarded dream, became a reality for many. Music and laughter replaced the sounds of gunfire. Razor, using his leadership skills, helped rebuild the community he had once terrorized. As for Jamal, he stopped using the book. The transmutation had taken a toll on his health. But he was content. He had transformed more than just materials. He had transformed a life, and in doing so saved his neighborhood. His mother cared for him, and in the quiet of their humble home, he found a different kind of peace. His actions had altered the course of his neighborhood's history, and the consequences of that choice were far more valuable than any gemstone. Life in the neighborhood changed. It was no longer defined by poverty and violence, but by hope and aspiration. Children attended schools instead of getting lured into gangs. Community centers replaced drug dens, and music filled the air instead of gunshots. The tale of the Hood's Alchemist became a legend in the community. The story of a boy who wielded ancient wisdom not for personal gain, but for the betterment of his community. Jamal, once an ordinary teenager with dreams too large for his world, had become an extraordinary symbol of change. As he lived out the rest of his days quietly with his mother, Jamal often thought about the book. It had given him power, caused him pain, but in the end it led him to his purpose. He was not just an alchemist of materials, but an alchemist of lives. He had taken a world hardened by violence and transmuted it into a place of hope and promise. His life had been shortened by the transmutation, but his legacy was immortal. The story of the Hood's Alchemist echoed through the streets, a tale of magic, courage, and transformation. A tale that redefined the neighborhood, gave it a new identity, and proved that even in the darkest corners of the world, the glow of hope could ignite a powerful change. And so, the Hood's Alchemist lived on, not just in the heart of his mother or the annals of his neighborhood's history, but in the spirit of the community he had forever changed. His story became a legend, an eternal reminder of the transformative power of sacrifice and courage. In a city that never sleeps, the subway was its pulsating vein, a constant churn of people and stories. No one knew this better than Rodney, the subway's aging janitor. For years he had watched the subway transform from a lively hub during the day to a haunting echo of its bustling self at night. Rodney had a secret. He could see shadows, not just the play of light and dark, but shadows of the past. When the last train departed and the subway descended into an eerie silence, the shadows came alive. They were stories, echoes of the past, playing out their narratives for Rodney. A clandestine kiss shared between two lovers, a heated argument leading to a tearful goodbye, a child's laughter echoing off the grimy tiles. Every shadow had a tale to tell. One night a new shadow appeared, darker and more tangible than the others. It was the shadow of a woman, her face hidden beneath a hood. Night after night she would appear at the same spot, always looking down the tunnel, as if waiting for something or someone. Intrigued and slightly unnerved, Rodney decided to learn more about her. Through whispers in the neighborhood and snippets from the old newspaper archives, he discovered her story. She was Emma, a young woman who disappeared decades ago. A quiet woman with a sad smile, Emma was known to wait for the last train each night for her lover, a musician who played in the jazz clubs downtown. One fateful night, Emma's lover had been delayed, and she waited alone at the subway. That was the last anyone saw of her. Her disappearance was chalked up as another unsolved mystery. Her story faded into obscurity, but her shadow lingered, waiting for the last train that never came. Armed with this knowledge, Rodney felt a strange bond with Emma's shadow. Night after night, he would sit by her, silently offering company to the lonely apparition. Then one night, as the clock ticked closer to the last train's scheduled arrival, Rodney did something he had never done before. He took out his harmonica, a rusty relic from his youth, and played a somber tune, filling the empty station with soulful melodies. As he played, he saw Emma's shadow react. She turned to face him, and for the first time Rodney could see her face clearly. Her eyes were filled with an indescribable sorrow and a touch of hope. Moved by the sight, Rodney decided to do more for Emma. He reached out to his friend, a local artist, and told him about Emma's story. Inspired, the artist created a mural in the subway station, a beautiful depiction of Emma waiting for her lover. The mural stirred the city. People came to see it, and Emma's story resurfaced. The city was reminded of the woman who waited for her lover, who never came, and vanished without a trace. One night, as Rodney cleaned the deserted station, he saw Emma's shadow again. But this time something was different. She was not alone. A man's shadow had joined her. He was holding a trumpet, and as Rodney watched, he played a tune. It was a sweet, longing melody, a serenade echoing in the subway. Emma's shadow turned towards the man. She reached out, touching his shadow. And then, to Rodney's astonishment, their shadows merged, forming a single silhouette of the lovers united at last. With that, Emma's shadow disappeared, leaving the subway devoid of her spectral presence. Rodney felt a sense of loss, but also relief. Emma was no longer waiting. She had found her peace. The subway shadows continued their nightly tales, but Emma and her lover were never seen again. The mural in her memory remained, a beautiful tribute to a love that transcended time, watched over by Rodney, the silent custodian of the subway's forgotten stories. Word spread about Emma's tale, and the subway station turned into an unlikely tourist spot. People came to see the mural, to remember Emma, and to share their own stories. The station was no longer just a transit point, but a place where stories lived, breathed, and were remembered. The shadows kept whispering tales to Rodney, each one a slice of life that had unfolded in the subway. The spectral stage played out stories of joy, heartbreak, love, and loss, with Rodney as their sole audience. He felt privileged to witness these intimate snippets of people's lives and made sure to remember each one, giving them the recognition they deserved. Years later, Rodney retired. He passed the subway's keys to a young janitor, whispering to him the secrets of the shadows. The young janitor was wide-eyed and curious, promising to listen to the subway's stories and keep them alive. And so the tradition continued. The subway station, under the watchful eye of its janitor, remained a keeper of stories. Emma's mural reminded everyone of a love lost and found in the realm of shadows. And the subway shadows continued to dance and whisper, echoing the city's heartbeat into the quiet night.
Hey everyone, welcome to our channel. We're so excited to have you here and share our content with you. If you're new here, make sure to click that subscribe button down below and hit the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Thanks for watching, and we can't wait to see you in the next video.